Hi, I'm Randy Guy, County Commissioner President, St. Mary's County, Maryland, and you're listening to the Maryland Association of Counties Conduit Street Podcast, the source for news and notes on Maryland policy and politics.
Welcome to the Briefing Room here on the Conduit Street Podcast. I'm Dom Butchko. Today, we are starting an exciting journey. Every Tuesday over the next few months, we will be dropping episodes from our new mini-series, The Briefing Room. There are a lot of big topics facing state and local policymakers, and often one episode or one white paper is just not enough to break them down. We are going to be talking to the movers and shakers, decision makers, subject matter experts, and other really interesting people shaping our world. Kicking off this exciting new adventure, we are going to be digging deep into energy policy. For several sessions, energy has become a center stage issue, with the General Assembly taking bold action that will reshape Maryland's energy landscape for decades. We are going to start by taking a step back. In this first episode, we are going to develop an understanding of the players shaping our energy landscape. We'll be exploring governmental and non-governmental actors, their authority or sometimes lack thereof, and many surprising facets of each. To kick off this conversation, we are joined by Kelly Speakes-Backman, Director of the Maryland Energy Administration, and Garrett Fitzgerald, Section Chief for Climate Programs and State Policy at the Montgomery County Department of Environmental Protection. Kelly and Garrett, for the first time, welcome to the Briefing Room.
Thanks for having me.
Good to be here.
So we're kicking this off on Earth Day, which is, if that's not a sign that this is going to be a killer miniseries, I don't know what is. Kelly, let's start with you. So before we start talking about the players, break down kind of what the energy system is, how it works. So we're starting this, 5-part series on the ins and outs. Give us a grounded understanding of where the electrons go and where do they come from.
Well, it's basically broken down into the power system consists of basically like 3 parts. There's generation, so the power that you make. There's transmission, which is at the first level, and distribution. And when people talk about the grid, they often talk about the transmission and distribution side. Now, transmission at a high voltage, that moves electricity from the power plant to a substation where it's kind of stepped down to levels that basically won't blow up your house, right? And then once it gets to that substation, it goes to your home. And that's like, so picture transmission lines as like those lattice towers that you might see along the highway. And then distribution lines are the poles that are in your neighborhood. And it's those poles that take the wires that come to your house at a low enough voltage level that, again, won't blow up your house. So that's good.
Okay, so you have generation, they create big electrons. Then you have transmission that goes to a substation. The substation turns the big electrons into little electrons. Then you have distribution. Those are the little electrons going to your house. Yeah. That is basic enough for me to understand. Thank you. Now let's dig into the players, because the energy space is huge. There's different levels of government and there's different levels of influence. We're digging into the energy space. Who are the folks that we should know about?
Oh, there are so many. So when you think about energy policy at the federal level, let's start there and then work our way into state. At the federal level, you have, of course, the White House and Congress that have to do with energy policy, but also there's a number of agencies in the administration, like the Department of Energy. There's the Bureau of Ocean and Energy Management that's part of the Department of Interior. There's the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, and even Department of Transportation has some involvement with energy policy writ large. When you think of EVs, for example, that's like a Department of Transportation thing. Basically, it's Congress and the administration and their bodies thereof that make energy policy. FERC, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, they regulate and set rules around that energy policy, not necessarily as energy policy makers, but more recently, we've seen a lot of rules and of orders that have actually set policies as well from FERC. So they're getting in the game. And then you have all the influencers around energy policy that help these bodies make their decisions, like businesses and trade associations and NGOs and state and local entities even have a say, especially as they get involved with their trade associations to influence federal policy. So that's kind of the federal scene.
Talk about then the state scene. So federal side, you have, Congress, we have the White House, and we all know how effective and well run both of those branches are. We have the agencies that report to them. And so, okay, that's the federal level. Now bring it down to the state level.
All right, down at the state level, it's way more fun.
As always.
As always, General Assembly, of course, and the governor's office administration, of course, they all set the energy policy. We saw that in this last legislative session that just ended. What was that, last week? Only last week?
No, a week and a half ago. Not that I'm counting. Not that
gosh.
I'm relieved.
So that's the main bodies that set energy policy. And then you have folks, again, who regulate and who influence policy. So my agency, Maryland Energy Administration, as well as like the Office of People's Counsel and the Office of the Maryland Department of Environment, they all inform and influence energy policies. And then you have like the Public Service Commission and also the Department of Environment when it comes to energy policy. They have a regulatory role as well. So they kind of, again, just like FERC is to the White House and Congress, PSC is to, it's a parallel of PSC to the governor's office and the General Assembly. And then you have the same kind of influencers. You've got businesses and advocates and utilities and other like labor and things like that.
Where does the PJM interconnection fit into all this? And I'll just put a flag here. We're going to have a whole episode on the PJM, but just as a primer, what is their role and how do they influence it?
That is such an awesome question. They are an operator, and I don't mean that in the pejorative sense. They're just an operator of the grid. So they operate at the transmission level. So at that wholesale level, they run several different types of markets that determine wholesale prices. And they answer to FERC, who is the regulator at that wholesale level. The wholesale prices are determined by like what your energy costs, what the capacity is, or basically how much the grid can hold, and also ancillary services markets. So they have a bunch of different sort of products that all feed into your wholesale price. They're independent. They oversee and make sure that we're operating well at the transmission level for both the generation and the delivery of that electricity to that substation that I mentioned earlier before. So then it gets down to the distribution level. So that's who PJM is. They are independent, supposedly. They answer to FERC, and they operate to make sure at the transmission level our lights stay on.
Let's break down for a second who has the most influence. Let's say I'm new to energy policy and I have absolutely no idea, which to many people listening is probably not a shock. But there are so many different players. So I've been doing energy for Mako for three or 4 years now. It's been in my portfolio. And when I started, just as we're talking on this episode, there's this alphabet soup of actors and there's different folks at each level and who do you influence and who has control of what. In terms of actual, they have, the levers in their hand and they can, really move the needle. Who is most influential to least so? What would you say?
Wow, that's a really hard question. I would say that the policy makers, so at the state level, that would be the General Assembly and the governor's office and their sort of cohorts. At the federal level, of course, I would say Congress would be really incredibly important, but also Department of Energy, because they have a lot of influence to those influencers. I mean, it really all lies with the people who are the lawmakers, the policymakers, if you will.
So it's really the legislative and executive branches.
Yeah. Except okay. Now I'm gonna throw this off, because once a law is made, it really matters how it's implemented, right? I mean, I think we learned that lesson in the last administration when this amazing set of laws in the Inflation Reduction Act and the IIJA, those laws were really important. And it was important that the regulations around those laws, guiding like how you implement that law, be done quickly. And they weren't. And now we're dealing with some of the aftermath of that with a new federal administration that came in and is upending because it wasn't clear enough. They couldn't get the money out the door. And now we as states and local entities are living with that. So yes, up until a law is made, and then turn your face to the Public Service Commission, MAA, MDE at the state level, and FERC and PJM at the federal level.
If I'm a state policymaker, can you describe, in your view, the relationship between the state and federal level when it comes to energy? Because let's take data centers, for example, and another flag. We're going to do a whole episode on data centers in this series. But the big thing with data centers, especially with Maryland, we're debating, do we get in the game? Don't we get in the game? Virginia, they got Data Center Alley. Pennsylvania's eyeing it up. West Virginia's eyeing it up. There's only so much that the Maryland General Assembly and the Maryland state government can do. And then we're also in the PJM, and they have a role in deciding, what goes where and what assets we need or what assets we should be pushing for. At the state level, kind of what does that relationship look like? Like, do you have any thoughts or even advice there for when we're deciding, what policy?
Yeah. Well, the good thing is the General Assembly just passed the Utility Relief Act that had some actual parts of holding data centers accountable while encouraging good behavior from these data centers baked into that law, which is not yet enacted, but it passed both houses.
By the way, bonus points. Do you know what RELIEF stands for, the acronym?
Yes.
I just had it in front of me like 20 minutes ago, and I don't, but I do remember that it is a very long acronym.
It is. It's too long. Oh, my God. Garrett, what's your answer?
Garrett, can you come in for the save?
I cannot without looking it up.
So anyway, Kelly, go on. You were saying the Utility Relief Act.
Restoring economic lifelines no, that's a different relief act. Never mind.
We really do our homework here on the briefing room.
Holy moly. It's so hard. I'm looking it up.
Reducing energy load inflation for everyday families.
Ding, ding, ding.
Ding, 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 ding.
Oh, Garrett coming in for the bonus points. I love it.
The Earth Day candy, Garrett.
The Earth Day you get a recycled pencil, Garrett. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
So anyway, Kelly, so we were breaking down in the Utility Relief Act, there's a section on data centers and making these large load customers basically like more responsible for how they're impacting our grid. So you were delving into that.
Yeah, I mean, like the governor said, we expect data centers that want to come into the state. We welcome them because, frankly, they can bring great tax revenue for us. They can help us, but you have to do it without imposing undue burden on the rest of us, right? So the big theme behind this is to bring your new clean energy, or at least pay for your own energy needs, right? You get bonus points if it's clean energy. By bonus points, I mean you can have accelerated permitting in this law. That's a great bonus. But the other part is any large load that is more than 25 megawatts really has to bring some form of energy to bear, whether that be your own generation, whether that be, participating in demand response equal to the load that equal to your load, or even just peak shaving. There's a number of ways you can implement that, but it's pretty exciting that we're beginning to get into a little more detail around what that means to bring your own energy or pay for your own energy needs.
Let's bring the conversation now down to the county level and really the best level of government. Let's be honest. How does energy policy, and let's start really big and we can drill down, but how does energy policy really impact local governments?
I'll take this one. Energy policy impacts counties and local governments broadly, I think, in a number of ways. And just to name a few of them, first, we are, as local governments, we are major energy users. We have a lot of government facilities. We pay the bills for those facilities. We see those bills rising just as everybody else in society has been seeing their energy bills rising. And we inherently benefit from policies that help to keep those bills down. At the same time, government, we tend to hang on to our government buildings for a long time. You can visit a lot of city halls around the country that we've been using the same building as City Hall for decades, right? And we have the opportunity to think about energy efficiency and solar and some of those things that pay for themselves over time. We have the certainty that we're going to continue to occupy those buildings and can make some of those investments. So energy policy that helps to incentivize folks to take energy efficiency and solar and those kinds of steps forward can sometimes be helpful to us to making the best possible use of public land and these public facilities. Second, of course, we care deeply about our communities. We want our residents and businesses to have access to affordable, clean, reliable energy as well, just as we hope that for our own facilities. And some of us in local government take further local policy action, for example, to help encourage energy efficiency investments in the building stock in our own communities. But we all very much care about the way state level energy policy affects and supports our communities. And third, let's remember that local governments are responsible for governing, including listening to their communities and making decisions, including land use decisions, to help guide the future of their communities and preserve and protect the character of their communities. And so we are frequently up against tensions where the existing character of a community might feel threatened by, for example, new energy infrastructure, whether it's transmission lines or a new natural gas power plant or a solar field, new data centers that use a lot of energy. There's when we're talking energy, a lot of the stuff we're talking about is big, expensive infrastructure that folks don't necessarily want to live too close to. And sometimes those kinds of uses come into conflict with our local vision for what we want our communities to be and land use priorities that we've had. And we are, of course, here in Maryland, we have requirements around forestry, and we do what we can to preserve agricultural land and make sure that we're making the highest and best use of land. We have a lot of pressure to find places for more housing. And now we've got energy also coming in, and a lot of these different kinds of uses. It's often the same kinds of properties in our communities that would be best for development for any one of those kinds of uses. Often they're all competing for the same places.
That point on competition, Garrett, that really resonates because I'm sure you remember last year, 2025, the Renewable Energy Certainty Act, which was the big solar bill. And then this year in particular being, the keynote session of housing. Like 2026 will go down as the session of affordability in housing. One of the big things was competition between solar development and housing development. And we're building the pipes out here, but this is nice flat land. And do we want to put, a field of solar panels there, or do we want to put affordable housing there? And how do we balance that? Garrett, I want to talk about the county role in actual energy development. This is a family podcast. So I'm going to say, if you have children, please cover their ears. I'm going to use a very dirty word, preemption. I'm sorry, I had to. But local governments in Maryland have been preempted when it comes to energy siting for about a decade, probably over a decade now. So we have some role, we have a lot of influence, but not necessarily authority over major projects. Just from a very high level, can you kind of walk through that process? I know Montgomery County is pretty familiar with it.
Yeah, it's a challenge. We can site energy infrastructure on public land. And so that is, the one opportunity for local governments is to help think about, are there places that are under our control that would be societally the best places to put energy infrastructure that needs to be developed, and that might cause the least problems. And that's, it's one of those roles that we can play. But, in large part, when folks are thinking about building a new transmission line through our communities, or they're thinking about placing a data center somewhere or a power plant somewhere, the initial conversations are not with us or the primary decision-making conversations anyway, are not with us at the local level. We are preempted, and we can and do try, and I think this is probably true of local governments throughout the state. We can try to be an active participant in those conversations. We encourage folks to try to locate infrastructure in places that will do the least harm or cause the least problems, and let's make highest and best use of land. And the answer to each of us locally is sometimes, wouldn't it be better to put that in a different community? I don't know where, but just not here.
Just not my community. Yeah.
There's, there are struggles because there are very, very real tensions with a lot of these projects. But, we often at the local level find out about upcoming major infrastructure projects that are being proposed when the public finds out about them and need to and are able to provide input into what's effectively now a state process. So last year, when the state passed the Renewable Energy Certainty Act, even though we had been preempted on solar for a long time, larger solar projects for a long time, we sort of made that official in state law last year through that Renewable Energy Certainty Act. And now anybody who wants to build a larger solar project above, I believe, 1 megawatt, which is roughly
1.5 megawatts. Don't preempt us further, Garrett.
8 acres or so of land covered by solar panels. Anything bigger than that, if you build it to some standards that were established, the uniform standards on a statewide basis, then you get to build it, and we don't get to say no, right? And so we did appreciate last year when, at least for our priority preservation areas like the agricultural reserve that we have here in Montgomery County, if we were to see a large amount of that land, that priority agricultural land, ended up being covered with solar panels, eventually we would regain the ability to say, how about no more?
The 5% cap. So in our priority preservation areas, if you hit 5%, then a local jurisdiction is unpreempted, reverse preempted, de-preempted, take your pick. But we move back and you can say no. Kelly, you look like you really want to jump in on this local conversation.
It's I'm not sure I really want to, but I'm gonna anyway. I couldn't agree more that there's a real tension between the competition for land. I think it's a shame that local entities aren't being engaged by developers early on so that they can work through with localities, local governments, and local folks as to what the right siting should be. But I would also say that energy is inherently a regional necessity. We have to have it. And I will say, back to the data centers, whether or not we allow data centers into our state, we're going to pay for it because we import 40% of our electricity. And that means it comes from the rest of the region. And if the rest of the region needs more energy, they're going to have less for us to take. And that means we need to figure out, it's either going to cost more or we're going to have more of our own generation. So there's this real tension that I completely agree with, that we have to work through, and you can't work through it through just a law. You have to actually be able and willing to engage early and often with localities. I feel pretty strongly about that. I used to work for a developer, and it was a big part of our work. We had a huge team of local engagement folks, because you have to go in early and explain how this is going to be helpful, see what else they may want out of this, and work with local governments to be able to make sure that it's cited properly. So aside from the law itself that I wasn't involved in, I think we just have to recognize that energy is inherently regional.
I will say, you should be thankful you weren't involved in that law. That law is a big contributor to why I now have to use Rogaine every day. It is a whole thing. I do think that tension. So to take a step back, not just the energy conversation, but what Annapolis is seeing a lot now is we have all of these policy priorities, and how do we balance them? And Kelly, I think you spelled that out really beautifully there, because we need to do all the things, but all the things can't be a priority. And so we want cheaper bills, but that means we might have to look at a smokestack or some solar panels or a battery. And so how do we balance
Batteries
that?
and solar panels rather than smokestacks, please, because I want to be able to breathe. It's
No,
your
I'm with you there, but all the options. Speaking of options and the development, let's turn really quick to the private sector. We as government folks, I'm guilty of this. I'm in government. I'm a hammer. Everything I see is a nail. How do we go about this? But in the energy space, it really is heavily influenced by the private sector, and we're a deregulated state. Kelly, talk about that. Talk about the private sector and their influence on this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Most of our energy itself, like the generation side that I was talking about earlier, that's generated by private suppliers. It's delivered in most cases here in Maryland by regulated investor-owned utilities, but it also can be contracted through third-party suppliers. So they have a big role to play in delivering the energy we use. They also have a large role to play in serving as a private company, serving their own needs. And oftentimes that means profitability and revenues. And so they have a vested interest in influencing policy. And I'm not saying that they don't and they shouldn't have a voice, because they also help us as Marylanders by paying our taxes. They are a part of our communities. And oftentimes I can say they are good actors, but we need to make sure that there is a balance. And that's the job of policymakers, to take all of that input on energy policy from, consumer advocates, from agencies that have a role in implementing policy or regulating, from the governor and the other local entities, county voices, all of those folks. Part of that is the private industry. During this past session, there was a big element of accountability that had to do with this Utility Relief Act, specifically for utilities and data centers, as we talked about a little bit earlier, but and other private companies. For utilities, there was like a 1-year pause on how they can ask for rate cases, or whether they can ask for rate cases that look forward versus historical. There was a cap on what they can recover from ratepayers for executive pay. There were a number of things that were being done, but there also needs to be accountability on the private companies, those sort of third-party suppliers. And I think there are laws on the books already. There very well may be further activities, like when we're thinking about programs at Maryland Energy Administration, we also think about accountability of making sure these people are treating communities fairly and consumers fairly. But on the other hand, these private companies can be a great part of the solution to get to cleaner energy. Think about companies that offer 100% renewable energy generation for their customers. They're supporting that. Or companies that can provide aggregated demand response. There's a lot of innovation also that comes from these private companies. So that can't be overlooked.
Before we wrap up, I have a question for both of you, and that's practical takeaways. This is episode 1 of a 5-part series on energy. We are going to be digging deep over those episodes. But at the end of our primer episode, if there's one thing, both of you are experts, both of you have been in the energy field for a while. If you're just getting into this, what's that 1 or 2 things that folks should know about? Look, Kelly, I'll start with you.
One thing that I would say the takeaway, and it might not sound very satisfying, but just for people to understand that when we're talking about providing relief for these skyrocketing energy prices, there is no silver bullet. It's not like one thing that we can do to lower rates. It's got to be a combination of short, medium, and long-term solutions, a lot of which we spoke about today. But yeah, that's the one thing, is just pay attention to the short term, but not to sacrifice the long-term goals that we're all trying to get to, which is cleaner, more affordable, and more reliable energy.
Yeah, I love that. I think for me, one of the big takeaways is this: we're seeing a lot of growth in the data center industry. Some of that may end up coming to Maryland, and each major hyperscale data center, these things use the amount of power of a small city or more. Take whole power plants offline at once, just from the amount of energy that they can use. We simply can't build a whole bunch of those without building a whole bunch of new electricity generation, and probably transmission lines to move that generation from wherever the power plants are built to the new data centers. I mean, some of it might get all built together with the power plant and data center right next to each other, but some of it surely won't. And so encouraging data center growth in Maryland is it doesn't need to just be a thing that happens to us. It's a policy decision at some level. To what extent do we want to encourage a lot of data center growth? We need to be really thoughtful and not just treat this as something that is happening no matter what, but we need to be really thoughtful about the ways in which we are encouraging or not these kinds of facilities and what kinds of offsetting new energy generation. And as we do that, we also need to accept that if we're going to build new power plants, they're going to have to go somewhere. And wrestling with those tensions around other land use priorities and thinking about where are the societally best places to put that infrastructure, that's going to be a challenging conversation. There are going to be folks who are happy and less happy with, the outcomes of that kind of conversation. I think this is going to be a major, major issue that we are going to be talking about all the time for quite a number of years. And we weren't talking about data centers and the need for all these power plants to make up that energy just 3 or 4 years ago. This wasn't a topic of state conversation, and now it is, and it's here. So it's really useful for all of us to, strap in, get smart on these issues, and really contribute to a thoughtful conversation in our local communities and across the state of Maryland here in the years ahead.
I like that. Ending on a happy note of job security for all of us. That is a nice place to leave it. Kelly and Garrett, thank you very much for being on this inaugural, also Earth Day episode of The Briefing Room. Let me read us out. Remember to like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. The Conduit Street Podcast's The Briefing Room will be out on Tuesdays with our normal show on Fridays. Remember now to register for our annual Mako Summer Conference, August 12th through the 15th in Ocean City, Maryland. And thank you to everyone for listening to The Briefing Room here on the Conduit Street Podcast.